Thank you everyone for joining today. This session is called How to Implement a Continuous Optimization Program in as little as 2 weeks. What we're really going to try to drive through today is sort of the essence of what is digital transformation and really how you can do that in a consistent, continuous improvement program, and what at your company you would need to do in the next 10 business days to be able to adopt this approach for yourself. Just before we get into it, safe harbor statement, this is an Oracle presentation, so we will give you a second just to look at this. As for a quick introduction, my name is Carly Voss. I am a consultant in Crow's NetSuite Cloud Solutions practice. Today I am joined by Ben Kramer, who is Crow's leader for post-implementation services.
Hey, Carly.
We will both be presenting to you today.
Okay, thanks, Carly, for the introduction there. So let's get into it. As a company, you implemented an ERP system. When you did that, you spent a lot of money, a lot of months to initially get live on NetSuite. And now, if you're like most people, when you initially got live, though, it's not quite perfect. That's in part because most implementations focus on what a company needs, but not necessarily what a company wants for their business. Said a different way, to get to your initial go live, usually you're going through and enabling all of the must-haves, but you're not necessarily getting to the nice-to-haves just yet. You're going through and replicating the functionality you had before, the features you had before, and making sure you don't disrupt or impair the business compared to the previous system that you were on. But oftentimes at go live, if you're like most implementations, you're not fully reaching all of the, oh my gosh, this would be really cool if we could leverage the power of the NetSuite platform and do this and do this and do this. So what we often see at Crow is a lot of people spend a lot of money on their initial implementation, on the services, on their own people's time to get it live. You get a certain portion of the value of the entire NetSuite platform, but you're certainly not reaching all of the potential value that there is to get out of an awesome business system like NetSuite. And then, so you get live, you got whatever percent of the theoretical total value you can get out of the system. You've met those initial customer needs, those initial vendor needs to be equivalent or slightly better than the system you were on before. And then over time, if you don't put any more time, any more internal time, external time, any more time on, there's changes in your industry, in your customer, in your vendor, employee, regulatory environments. And all of these little changes, if you did no effort at all, would start making your business system a little bit less and a little bit less valuable each month as the requirements have changed since that initial implementation. So, Carly, if you can go on. Yep. So let's talk about a couple approaches that are typical for post-implementation effort, right? These efforts and make sure you're keeping your system at least as good as it was at go live, but ideally continue to make it better and better, right? Now, in this conversation, I'm not going to differentiate when I say effort, whether that effort is something in-house as in-house employees or external employees. That's a little irrelevant for this conversation. Okay, so we're gonna go through a couple models here to lay the groundwork as to why we favor continuous improvement. First, let's talk about the typical ad hoc support model, right? When a lot of people go live, they spend a lot of money, they go live and they buy a small ad hoc support contract or bring in one person to deal with ad hoc support. The thing with ad hoc support is in most cases, though, the assertion that ad hoc support is trying to address is that every time that we have, a slightly new customer that has a slight new PDF version that they require to be printed out, or every time that we have a bug or a defect or this, the assertion of support is that they're trying to get that back up to the same level that it was at before, right? To restore back to steady state. Or said a different way, it's not about making your environment more valuable. It's about keeping your NetSuite platform equally valuable. Whenever there's one of these degradation events, support's get it there to get you right back up to where you are. So those changes in customer, vendor, industry needs is keeping you steady state, but it's not really taking you forward, pushing you forward on a typical support type of contract. So if you're not doing support, then another type of, or even if you are doing support, another type, Carly, if you can head on, another type of post-implementation effort, again, whether internal or external, gets around what we at Crow would call a phase X project, right? Phase X is a project after initial implementation when you say, hey, we can spend some more effort, internal money, external money at discrete times, and go and implement the next module, the next big thing, whether that's fixed assets, NSPV, advanced manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Each of these phase X projects are event driven, right? You go live, you put a bunch of effort for a month or two, you go live with it, and then nothing for a few months or a year, right? Then you do another phase 3. A lot of effort, a lot of rush, and then nothing till you go to a phase 4, and so on and so forth. Each time you launch a new phase, it gives you a nice bump in the value of your business system. You're getting more and more out of each new phase that you implement it. But again, each time after you implement, you get that nice bump, but slowly over time, it starts degrading again because customer requirements are changing, vendor requirements are changing, industry is changing, regulation, et cetera, et cetera. All of these changes are moving you backwards if you're not continuing to put effort in. Okay. So we talked about ad hoc. We talked about, a phase X or phase 2, phase 3 type of post-implementation effort. Now let's talk about the third approach. And this is the one we're going to focus on the rest of the presentation today. This is the true continuous implementation program, where we're going to come in and we're going to say, what could you do? How could you hire, for example, one person, right? And how could you use that one person or that salary equivalent of one person to continuously improve each month? So that way, 6 months from now, you can look back and be like, wow, our NetSuite environment we went live gave us so much value, but now 6 months later, it's giving us even more value. And a year later, even more value. And 3 years later, even more and more and more value. How do we keep improving over time? This is about so all of this kind of gets us into, and we'll talk about some different approaches here, but all of this gets us into the concept and the benefits of what an agile-based digital transformation program that's broadly accepted in your company can really do. A decade ago, digital transformation or agile concepts was only embraced by the software shops out in the Valley. Today, it's widely accepted in boardrooms across America. This type of continuous improvement, this type of agile movement, right? This agile approach to implementation and software and making your business better, that's accepted by and large across the board. And you see that, right? You see it in literature. You see it in consulting firms ads. Go to any single consulting firm now, go to their website, and you're going to see digital transformation plastered all over all of our websites, Crow's included. So that's what we're here to talk about, and how we can look at these traditional models in the yellow, in the orange. Oh, Carly, go forward. That's what we're here to talk about, the traditional models that we can look at in the yellow, orange, blue for your spend after go live, and how we can talk about how a true ongoing continuous improvement or digital transformation approach might look the best going forward for you.
So as we look at this on our side at Crow, we see that there are really 9 steps, 9 exercises that you need to go through to implement a continuous improvement program inside your company's business system environment. What are the steps? First, you need to determine what your investment will look like. Then you'll need to decide on an ongoing optimization methodology. You'll need to implement a development operations systems or a DevOps system. You'll need to perform a skill assessment of your internal team. You have to build a backlog list, assemble a steering committee, set your Scrum frequency. You'll also have to define an agreed upon sprint release notes and sprint retrospective format, as well as finally, you need to specify your approach around NetSuite and other biannual releases inside of your business system environment. Okay, so we're going to use the next 15 minutes to talk through these 9 steps, which we think are very reasonable activities to do across 10 days once you commit to them. Once you do this, you'll be well on your way to embracing a continuous agile-based digital transformation program to make it so you really get the most value out of NetSuite.
All right. So for step one, first thing we need to do is determine what that investment will look like. At the beginning of this presentation, we talked a lot about the typical ad hoc support model, about phase X support models out there. Unfortunately, nothing in life is free. So when you go live, if you want to have a continuous improvement program that is going to require some additional investment of effort, right? Whether this is internal folk, external folk, whether it's going to require investment, not just from your IT team, but also investment from your business users, right? And potentially some investment from outside help. Now, you know you want to do it. You know you want to have this culture of continuous improvement, but how much do you need to spend? How much do you need a budget for a continuous improvement program to make sure it's successful in driving that company culture? So it'll depend company by company, but in general, Crow recommends to start with one employee equivalent salary, right? So think of what it would cost to hire one person into your organization to run this and put those funds aside. Now, whether you end up using those funds to hire a single person, whether you end up using those funds to pull bits and pieces of people at your organization to help out, or whether you use those funds to work with external help, that level of funds is a great start to say, okay, I'm going to take that amount of money, I'm going to invest that over the course of the year, and I'm going to see what the return can be by implementing such a continuous improvement program. I can tell you at Crow, we help a lot of our customers with their NetSuite continuous improvement programs. And we haven't had a customer yet come back and say, hey, investing one employee equivalent worth of salary per year is way too much. I wish we didn't spend that money. They're all coming back and saying usually the exact opposite, right? Of saying, oh, wow, look at the return on investment I got by continuing to leverage the power of the platform by doing this continuous improvement program. So to recap, the first thing we got to do is determine what your investment will look like. That's the table stakes. And Crow's recommendation is an employee equivalent worth of salary as the appropriate investment to start with.
Okay, so now that we've decided on an investment, the next thing that we're going to look at is how are we going to go about doing this? What's the methodology that we're going to use? For the longest time, Waterfall controlled ERP implementation, and this controlled the initial implementation, certainly controls phase 2 or phase X type projects. But when we're looking at continuous improvement, the market has kind of been taken over by Agile and Scrum and these other iterative type approaches. So Waterfall used to be super common, still is in phase 2, phase X projects. But in continuous improvement, whether it's software or not software related, Scrum has really taken over as the lead. So what you need to shift your thinking to is, okay, Waterfall is great for projects, but this isn't a project. This is a movement that you're trying to get your company to do where you're constantly every month showing that you're getting more and more out of the NetSuite platform. So at Crow, that's really how we see it. It's a movement, a different way of even thinking about your business systems as something that you are constantly trying to improve. And based upon that, we recommend a Scrum-based approach. So we've got a budget, we've got an approach of using either Agile or Scrum, or potentially you chose one of the other ones. But with both of those in hand, the next thing that we need is a tool to manage them. So NetSuite's a great software, great tool for managing your business. Now what you really need is a tool to manage your ongoing software environment improvements, or a DevOps tool, development operations tool. There are a bunch of different tools out there on the market, whether it's Jira or Azure DevOps. At Crow, we personally use Azure DevOps to manage things like user stories, backlogs, tasks, development tasks, code defects, you name it. The other really cool thing about these platforms is that goes really well with NetSuite. A few years ago, NetSuite embraced SDF, which is software development framework. So that way you could extract all customizations and setups into their source XML or source JavaScript files. All of those have to be checked in the source control against these DevOps systems, which makes them a really great pair for anybody who has a robust NetSuite environment. So you really have to decide on a tool here. Either way, you have to have some type of tool to manage the ongoing sprint cycle.
Okay, so we've talked about the investment you got to make. We've talked about the methodology and how you need to get a DevOps tool in place. For the fourth step, we need to look at performing a skills assessment of our internal team. We want to do continuous improvement. We want to continuously iterate, right? Upon our business systems, we want to say, hey, NetSuite is a super, super powerful tool, super powerful platform. And there's no way we're getting everything out of it today that we could, right? But how do we use that system? How do we use, the platform itself to make our employees happier, to make our customers happier, make our vendors happier, to more easily comply with regulations and industry changes? There's so many things we can do. The thing is, you need a bunch of different skill sets that actually make that happen, to transform where you are today in NetSuite into where you want to go, right? Whether that's, by adopting more standard functionality, by doing more workflows, customizations, reports, you name it. There's a bunch of different skill sets it needs to take, right? So at Crow, when we look at the skill sets it takes to embrace and further your environment, we have 6 different personas that we believe it takes to most effectively improve. The first is a Scrum Master. You view it as a project manager, but this is someone managing the process, the timeline, and the stakeholders to get stuff done. That's typically, someone who has a different mindset than your product experts. The second persona we have is a functional architect. This is someone who knows the solution extremely well, but they are, a 10-year plus resource, so they can make the right decisions, but they're not usually the most affordable to use a ton of time with. The third persona is a functional specialist, right? While a functional architect knows everything very well, the specialist is someone who can come in, help with the functional documentation, help gather the requirements, help put together the end user documentation at a rate that's much more affordable and reasonable to the business stomach. On the technical side, because there's going to be a lot of complex workflows, customizations, and integrations, we'll need a technical architect. This is a peer of that functional architect, ideally somebody who has 10 years or more on top of NetSuite to help guide us and make sure we're going down the right path on any technical work we do. And as their peer, we need the persona of a technical specialist. This is someone who can spend the hours, go and do the development, the root development, right? And do the technical documentation. And finally, in the 6th persona we need someone with a tester, right? The tester has a mindset of saying, okay, we have this new process, we have this new functionality. How do I go and test it and make sure it's robust enough to actually meet the business user? So all 6 personas are required. That's not to say that one person can't play multiple personas in your program. But when we talk about budget, and when we're recommending a budget the size of a single employee, how can you hire someone to play all 6 roles to fit the budget? That's going to be very difficult to do. So you need to look at your internal team and say, hey, who can I pull in all these different roles, knowing that maybe I need to use people on a part-time basis to actually get these different personas to be fulfilled under the budget that I have. Again, at Crow, we have an offering, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation, where we take all 6 personas, we smash them together in what we call a synthetic employee, so you can get all these different skill sets at the cost of a single employee. But that doesn't necessarily have to be your approach. There's a bunch of different approaches we can do. The key thing is looking at your team, assessing where they are, assessing the skills, and making sure we've got all of these personas covered in the program.
Okay, so we figured out a team, we figured out our operation system, figured out a methodology, figured out a budget. The next thing that we really want to try to do is to build what Agile would call a backlog. What is a backlog? Backlog is a list of everything that you could do in your NetSuite environment that would add value to somebody in your business. Whether that's the AP clerk, AR clerk, whether that's somebody who's working in a warehouse or the CEO. Every little time that somebody says, if only I could do this, it would make my job better. If only I could do that, my customers would be happier. Every single thing like that, what you can do to improve, that is the feedback that goes on the backlog. How do you get this? Usually what you do is you take a day, you go and interview each different area of your business, each different department that is using NetSuite. Some companies will say, well, I don't even know what I would do with a continuous improvement program. I don't even know how to go about building a backlog. What you do is you take one day to interview all the different people within your business, because at the end of that day, you will end up with hundreds, if not literally thousands of different things that people want on the backlog to say, if I could do this, this would be better. So what happens after you build the backlog is the Scrum Master goes in, takes a look at that backlog, goes and starts to estimate what are called story points, or estimated effort. That is how much effort it is going to take to do each one of these items. So the backlog is just everything that you could possibly do to add value. We're not committing to everything on the backlog. What we're going to do is go through the backlog, estimate how much effort each of these items will take. And then each sprint, we're going to have this concept of a steering committee inside the business. Usually that's the C-suite, that will look at everything that's requested by the business and say, okay, each month I only have so much budget, so I can only do so many of these story points. They're then going to take however many story points you decide, and they're going to prioritize to say, okay, this month I can commit to getting these ones off the backlog. Next month, I'll tentatively commit to getting these ones off the backlog. And that is how building the backlog is going to work.
Awesome. So for step 6, Carly just briefly touched on it, right? But step 6 is all about assembling your steering committee. This is going to be the team that decides on the things we need to prioritize and in which sprint they should go into. You know, as Carly mentioned, there'll be thousands, literally most of our clients that we work with on this have thousands of things on their backlog. This becomes a classic economics problem, right? There's unlimited wants and desires with a limited resource pool, right? A limited resource budget. So how do we do this? Again, we normally recommend this steering committee. They will be the ones setting the sprints. And what we, for the steering committee, Crow usually recommends that it is C-suite level people who are involved, because when we're looking at that entire backlog, we can only fit so much in per month, per sprint, right? What we want to make sure we're doing is that we're picking out the most strategic elements that we can. They're going to add the most value to the business. And usually those executives, those C-level team members are the right people to be involved in this, because they're the right ones that can look at it and say, hey, if I do this, this, and this will help take our business systems from being what Crow calls an order qualifier into being an order winner, right? To actually help us drive new business, lower costs, you name it. So again, our recommendation, the steering committee, make sure that those are senior enough people making decisions as to what to do on the backlog. But once we have a steering committee, once we have a decision what to do in the backlog, that's going to get us into step 7, which I'll pass back over to Carly.
So once we've got that steering committee to tell us which things we're going to work on in each sprint, we at Crow, we recommend that we would do that on a kind of per month basis for this type of program. So then we need to go set our Scrum frequency. And this is really saying, okay, we commit to the business that we can do these 7 different things in the sprint during this month. The Scrum meeting is it's an agile concept of saying, okay, everyone who's working on it, we're going to get together for a couple minutes a day, a couple minutes a week, whatever it is. And we're going to have this frequency where we touch base to make sure that there is nothing blocking our way to completing these different backlog items for this month. So at Crow, we usually recommend that this is Tuesday, Thursday, 15 minutes each, so that everybody who's still a part of any of those 6 personas, any of the business users, they can join really quickly just to make sure that there are no roadblocks to getting everything done.
Perfect. So we've gone through, we've made the sprint, right? We've talked about how we're going to interact during the sprint with those Scrum meetings. Step 8, what we need to do is define upon what that end of the sprint looks like. Are these release notes and sprint retrospective, right? In an agile mindset, what you commit to for that month, those backlogs you commit to for the month, those are sacred, right? You need to do everything you can in your capacity to get all of those done. We already budgeted the story points. We fit the story points into how much we think we can do per month. And now we need to do everything we can to clear everything on that backlog. The sprint release notes is about how do we communicate at the end of the month what was actually accomplished against the plan. How do we disseminate that to everyone in the business, all of the stakeholders in the business, so they can gain faith in this agile Scrum-based approach, of a continuous improvement program. And then finally, that sprint retrospective on how we adopt that, that's going to take place 2, 3, 4 days after the end of the sprint, after the end of the month, where we're going to look at and say, okay, here are the things that didn't go perfectly. Here's the things we could change to further increase the velocity of this continuous improvement program. Both of these things we recommend that we share widely within the business, not just the people in the business system team, but across your entire organization, so the organization can gain faith on the continuous improvement program that you're running.
And then finally, that last little bit that does get a little bit NetSuite specific is we've got all these backlogs where business users are saying, okay, I wish I could do this, wish I could do that, all of these value added things. The final step that you do is say, okay, well, if we're running monthly sprints, which again is what Crow does, we could have sprints that are 2 weeks long or a month long, month and a half. That's your choice. At Crow, we do monthly sprints. So that way we can time it in coordination with month end so that we can be less use on the heavier portions of the month when there's accounting changes and all that month end stuff. So the last thing we need to do is specify an approach revolving around NetSuite and other NetSuite related biannual releases, because there's always going to be changes to your customers, vendors, employees, industry, all these other driving needs that are going to be kind of forcing you to be in this balance between staying static and also continuously improving. Also, the software itself is getting better every 6 months, significantly better with those NetSuite releases. So how do we include and time box for what we're going to do with those releases? So again, here at Crow, because we do recommend monthly sprints, 4 out of those 12 monthly sprints are going to be focused around the NetSuite changes, with the other 8 focused around the business. So the month before the release, we're reviewing everything, all the new features, that might be useful for the business, and we're doing regression testing. The month of the release, we're going in and implementing the new features that can add value by themselves. They weren't features that were generated from your business or inside of your business. These are features that were brought to you by NetSuite. So if we run through these 9 steps, determining your investment, determining your methodology, your tool, your team, the skills they have, working with the business, building a backlog, assigning a steering committee to prioritize the backlog and setting that monthly rhythm, setting the end of the month and the sprint review, figuring out how you work with NetSuite. If you run through those 9 steps in the next 10 days, we think that you're going to be really well positioned to kind of attack and gain that continuous improvement program for yourself.
Okay. So that's what we have for you, the 9 steps to go through. If you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this, do know that Crow can help, right? At Crow, we have a program called Hire. That's for our ongoing digital transformation program to do exactly this with companies. We actually run through these 9 steps hand in hand with the company. And then we actually go forward and provide a team of professionals at the exact same cost of you hiring a single person yourself to run this continuous program with you in perpetuity, to serve as a team member, right? To serve as if we were the synthetic employee, this employee equivalent, as just another member on your team, to help bring the most value we can to your NetSuite platform, to your NetSuite business system there. With NetSuite, there's so much you can do. And if you're like most companies, right now you're only seeing a portion of that value and not fully unleashing what the suite can do for you. So hopefully you've got the team. Potentially you've already got this team internally that you can pull together to do this. Potentially you can go out and hire to get an additional person inside. Or you can, reach out to Carly and I, and we can have further conversations how a firm like Crow or advanced customer support from NetSuite, or how others can go through to help you on your journey to get to true digital transformation in an ongoing continuous mindset. Thanks so much for all your time today. Carly and I enjoyed our chance to get to speak with you, and enjoy the rest of SuiteWorld. Thanks so much.